So guys, what's going on? I hope you guys are well. So guys, George Groves has fired shots. I'm quite surprised that he's what he's just said. He said that George Groves does not deserve a fight with Canelo Alvarez. He's not worthy of that fight. He's been very inactive over a few years, and his recent performances don't merit a fight with Canelo Alvarez. Wow, wow, that's some. I don't know whether George Groves is getting back at Billy Joe, because I remember when Billy Joe and George Groves was a Sky Sports pundit. Billy Joe, after his fight with Martin Murray, made some comments. I think, oh, Callum Smith beat George Groves, but George Groves finished everybody. I think he said something like that, and maybe George Groves didn't take kindly to those comments, because it's quite surprising that Groves has come out and said what he said. Now, I don't disagree with George Groves. I do disagree, and I can see, no, actually, I'll say it this way. I disagree with George Groves' comments, but I can see where he's coming from. Now, Billy Joe Saunders hasn't had a worthy win. And to be honest, really, if you look at his career, Andy Lee, David Lemieux, he's got those 2 wins, but really, they ain't really top. For me, they're not top fighters. I think they're good world champions, but really, if you look at it, they're the only 2 wins he's had. He's beaten 2 former world champions in his whole career. And of late, if you look at his resume, it's fairly poor. He was gifted that WBO title again, in the 168-pound division. He's not really fought anybody in the 168-pound division. He was gifted that title against Shifat Usufi, who I don't even believe is a domestic level fighter. I think he's about a domestic level fighter, if I'm honest, right? And Callum Smith at least fought George Groves. Yes, George Groves might not be at his best, but, even George Groves not at his best is better than Shifat Usufi. So where George Groves is coming from, I can understand that, this guy, he's been very inactive. He's not really fought anybody in a couple of years. He hasn't looked great in those fights. Against Martin Murray, he didn't look too special. Yeah, he won rounds, but Murray was 40 years of age, inactive, and he didn't look that impressive in that fight. He hasn't really done a lot that says he can beat Canelo of late. Apart from his fanboys thinking that he's got a style that can beat Canelo Alvarez, which I totally disagree with. I don't think Billy Joe will beat Canelo. But here's where I disagree with George Groves, is the fact that Canelo Alvarez wants to unify the division. Billy Joe's a world champion. Canelo Alvarez, there isn't really, who's he gonna fight? Caleb Plant? Who's he gonna fight? Who else is he going to fight? Benavidez. And one thing I want to say about all these guys, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, Benavidez, Caleb Plant, they're all untested. They all haven't fought anybody, really. So the problem is, with all these other fighters that Canelo could potentially face, all of them are untested. All of them haven't really fought great fighters. Their resumes are poor. So that's where I disagree with George Groves, where he says that he doesn't deserve the fight, because anybody else Canelo fights in the 160 to 168-pound division, they're all in the same boat. People want to see him fight Andrade. Andrade's exactly in the same boat. He's fought nobody. He's got even worse resume than Saunders. Smith had only beaten George Groves. Benavidez, who's he beat? Let's be real, who's he beat? Caleb Plant, who's he beat? The only fight, really, that I think Canelo, that would be a worthy challenge that you could say is Bertabiev at 175. But Canelo doesn't really seem like he wants to move to 175. So really, when you look at all of these guys, this is why I disagree with George Groves, because there's no one in the 168-pound division that you can say on merit deserves a Canelo fight. Their resumes are poor, right? It's only their fans saying their styles give Canelo problems. Like Smith's fanboys were saying before the fight that, yeah, he's tall, he's going to give Canelo a lot of trouble. So really, they don't really deserve the fight on their resumes. But the fact that they're world champions and the division's really poor, Billy Joe Saunders does deserve the fight. But I can see where George Groves is coming from. That this man's not fought anybody worthy in a while, right? He's been inactive. His performances haven't been great of late. Why does he deserve a fight with Canelo? But again, that's because there's nobody else. Everybody else that's a potential opponent for Canelo are all in the same boat. They all fought nobody. They're all, still looking to prove themselves. They haven't really fought many world level fighters. So the problem is, it's kind of like a lot of these guys, like Andre's a two-weight world champion. You know, Saunders is a two-weight world champion. And they've done it without facing anybody. Really, when you look at it, they haven't really fought. Like Billy Joe Saunders has fought 2 former world champions across 2 weights. Like, that's a terrible, terrible when you've been fighting for so long at world level. To have only fought 2 former world champions, and those 2 former world champions are guys that get beat by any of the other top guys in around those divisions. Lemieux loses to everybody in the middleweight division that's of top level, and the 168-pound division. So I don't, and Andy Lee by that thing, I think he loses to everybody at the top level. So George Groves is basically saying that Billy Joe should fight Eubank. You know, that's a more entertaining fight. That's a good fight for the fans. But he doesn't think that he deserves a Canelo fight. Now, a lot of people think that. A lot of people don't want to see Max Kellerman put a list together of the top 5 fighters that he wants to see Canelo fight. And Billy Joe Saunders wasn't even in that list. Because he hasn't done anything. At world level, Billy Joe Saunders hasn't really done anything. He hasn't fought top fighters in around middleweight or super middleweight. It's a fact. Who's he fought at 168? Nobody. Shifat Asufi and the other guy on the YouTube undercard. Don't even know the guy's name. So, like, he hasn't fought anybody. He hasn't fought anybody. At middleweight, his best wins were Andy Lee, Eubank, and fought Ryder and Lemieux. But really, all of those guys, when you stick them in there with the top middleweights, they'd lose. Like, Andrade for me beats Andy Lee. Andrade for me beats Eubank. Andrade for me beats David Lemieux. So, and Andrade's not proven himself. Charlo beats all of those names that, you know, so Billy Joe needs to fight a Charlo and Andrade. Really, to be honest, here's what I think should happen. I think Andrade should fight Billy Joe. Like, Andrade wants the Billy Joe fight, but I don't think Billy Joe wants the Andrade fight, if I'm honest with you. I think Billy Joe just wants to fight Canelo. I think, like I said, he looks at the Andrade fight where he's got a lot to lose and he's not going to make as much money as he would fighting Canelo. So he rather, if he's going to take an L, he rather go in there and fight Canelo and risk everything against Canelo for a bigger payday, which makes sense. It's a business. It's business at the end of the day. Why fight Andrade, a fight that you could potentially lose? That's a 50-50 fight that you could lose and then lose everything and then not get the fight with Canelo. But the problem I have is Andrade could also chase Canelo, right? But he wants the Billy Joe Saunders fight, so I respect that. I respect that. So Andrade knows that really, I don't really deserve a fight with Canelo. Although he says he wants a fight with Canelo, he doesn't really deserve it. Let me prove myself against Billy Joe Saunders. He said that in the IFL, I believe. He was given an interview on the weekend after the Canelo fight, and that's what he said. He said, I want to prove myself against Billy Joe Saunders, beat him, and then I'll fight Canelo. And that's what I think Billy Joe Saunders needs to do, because I don't think Billy Joe Saunders, I've been saying it all along, I don't think his career's been structured very well. Like I said, he's not really fought many world-level fighters. What I mean is former world champions, current world champions. He hasn't fought many guys, and that's not a good preparation, because Billy Joe Saunders is going to fight, if he gets a fight with Canelo next, he's going to be jumping many levels to fight Canelo Alvarez. And generally, when you jump many levels, it doesn't work out. We saw what happened with Smith. Now, people keep saying that Billy Joe's style is going to give Canelo a lot of trouble. However, like I said, when you talk about Billy Joe's ring IQ, his style, who's he done it against? That's what you've got to realize. He's not done it against fighters that are world-class fighters. He's done it against fighters a notch below that. Your ring IQ only gets tested when you're in there with guys like Andrade, guys like Charlo, guys like that are world level, world champions. Andy Lee, let's not forget, people keep going on to that Andy Lee fight. The Andy Lee fight was a majority decision. The Chris Eubank fight was a split decision. They were very close fights. The only fighter that he's beat comprehensively is David Lemieux, but that's one fight against a very limited fighter in Lemieux. Let's not forget what Golovkin did to Lemieux before Billy Joe Saunders got in the ring. Let's not forget what Rubio did to Lemieux before, you know, Billy Joe fought him. So Lemieux had already had losses prior to that, and the blueprint was there to beat him. Billy Joe had a perfect style to beat David Lemieux. But Lemieux's not a great fighter. Lemieux's a fighter that if you can box and move, he can't win. He's got his feet stuck in the mud. Lemieux's like I keep saying to you, Lemieux's no Maidana, where he's a big puncher and he closes off the ring and he shuts you off, and he's got heart and he's got a lot of determination. Lemieux's not like that. He can be broke mentally. He's limited. His feet are very slow. And Canelo's not like that. Canelo's not Lemieux. There's levels and levels between Lemieux and Canelo. And I just think people are dwelling too much on that Lemieux fight. Lemieux's a very limited world champion. Very limited world champion. And Billy Joe beat him. But like I said, Lemieux was beaten well by Golovkin before that. And there's no, listen, Golovkin's a great fighter. I personally think, why don't Billy Joe fight even a Golovkin? Like, here's the thing. I think Billy Joe Saunders, I think if he gets the Canelo fight, he deserves it. He's a world champion. Canelo wants to unify. Fair enough. But Billy Joe Saunders shouldn't dwell on that Canelo fight. Billy Joe Saunders needs to just fight anybody that's worthwhile. Golovkin, Andrade, anybody. But for me right now, what Billy Joe Saunders is doing, Billy Joe Saunders just wants to jump in there with Canelo because he knows that's the biggest payday for him. And he knows that if he fights Golovkin, he's not going to get paid as much. And he potentially would lose against Golovkin. And the same way he thinks about Andrade. So he rather risk it all against Canelo where he's going to get paid a lot more. It's business. It's business. Golovkin's a dangerous fight for Saunders. And so is Andrade. But he doesn't want to take the risk against those guys because he doesn't get paid as much. And he feels like he's got not a lot to gain fighting Andrade or fighting Golovkin right now. You know, Golovkin is a world champion at middleweight, but Billy Joe's at 168, and he just thinks that the Canelo fight, Golovkin's not pound for pound best in the world. Neither is Andrade. Canelo is. So I can see why Billy Joe Saunders wants that fight, but I just feel like if you look at Golovkin, he isn't chasing Canelo now. Andrade, he wants to fight with Billy Joe Saunders. So why don't Billy Joe Saunders fight Andrade? Because that fight can be made like that. Where the Canelo fight, Canelo might fight Plant. Canelo might go and fight Plant. So I think Billy Joe Saunders is going to wait for the Canelo fight. I think he's going to look to hang out for the Canelo fight. I can't see him fighting Andrade. Just because I think, like I said, risk and reward. I think the risk is too great and the reward doesn't merit the risk. I think the only way he'll fight Andrade is Canelo decides to go fight somebody else. And then he'll jump in with a fight with Andrade. But I think Billy Joe Saunders knows that there's a great chance that Canelo will pick Billy Joe Saunders next to fight. I think he'll pick Billy Joe Saunders to fight. I think he'll fight him next. Let's not forget, before the Callum Smith fight, before the pandemic, went into the lockdown, Canelo and Billy Joe Saunders were close to fighting. Or the contract was almost signed. So I do think Canelo will fight Billy Joe Saunders because I think he'll look at it and think, I don't think Canelo looks at Billy Joe Saunders as a tough fight. I don't. Personally, I think he thinks that actually, I think he looked at Smith. That was probably a tougher fight I think he thought Smith had more power. So I do think that he'll probably fight Saunders next, if I'm honest. So what do you guys make of what George Groves says about Billy Joe? Saying that he doesn't think he deserves to fight Canelo. Leave your thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, guys. And guys, remember to please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.